What's up, YouTube? So it's been about a year since I made the switch from Cubase to Bitwig. Did I make the right choice? Let's talk about it. So for some of the long-time followers of the channel, you probably know that I've been using Cubase for a long time, but in the past year, I made the switch from Cubase to Bitwig. So I did a video about some of my thoughts as I kind of transitioned, and I wanted to do a bit of a follow-up video now that it's been a year. I want to talk about some of my thoughts and how I've kind of overcome some of the obstacles which I've talked about in that previous video. So if you want to check out that original video, check out the links in the description. So one of the first things that I brought up in the video was the difference in the audio editing capabilities. And I want to talk about how I've overcome some of those differences. So in Cubase, the offline audio processing is really cool. It allows you to kind of grab individual clips of an audio sample and process them with different effects. So things are a little bit different in Bitwig. However, you do actually have a little bit more, let's say, creative control over just the plain audio file. There's various ways you can kind of edit and transform the audio file after you've kind of effected it. I guess at first, the kind of effect switching system, which I used to use quite often with the offline processing, is not the same. You can't just grab a chunk of audio and put an effect on it. However, what we can do is we can create an effects switch system using the effects layer container. So what this is it basically allows you to put different effects here. So let's say, for example, I'm going to put a rift on the first layer. On the second layer, we can put a different effect, let's say infiltrator. And then on the third layer, we can say a combination of like a delay and a reverb. So we can kind of have these stacks of effects as well. In Bitwig, you have various different types of containers. We have the effects layer. I was actually wrong. This is not the one that we want to be using. We want to be using the effects selector. So what we can do is we can right-click the effects layer and change this to effects selector. And now what this does is this allows us to actually switch between which effect is currently on, right? And there's various modes to choose from. So we can say, this is new to Bitwig 5, by the way, the round robins. There's various different ways which you can kind of take a note input and trigger different effects layers, which is really cool. However, we want to set this to manual, and we can modulate this effect either manually in the window over here. So what we can do is we could say, just modulate between these different effects, like on the actual audio file here. So we kind of get a similar thing. Yes, it's not offline processing, but we're able to switch between the different effects and choose what chunks of audio we want on the effects. The plus side about this is it's non-destructive. So we can audition a couple of different ones, and when we find the sort of sequence that we like the most, we can render that to a sample and further edit it with some of the other controls. So what I want to do is just jump into Rift and Infiltrator and choose some random presets over here.
Connection established. Connection established. Connection.
Okay, cool. So now we've got a cool little loop here. What we can do is we can right-click and bounce. And so this is now going to write that modulation of the different effects to a single audio file. Now what we can do is we can go here and toggle active. This basically just removes it from the CPU, so we no longer have to worry about any issues like that. And now we've got the audio file over here, which we can jump in and further edit. So in the original video, I did say that the kind of Cubase audio editing capabilities are a little bit more advanced. But now that I've kind of dived into Bitwig and I've figured out a lot more about the software and what it has to offer, I'm kind of on the opposite side of the fence now. I kind of feel like there are more features here to edit audio. They're just not the same. So, you know, when I was first diving into it, I was like, it doesn't have the stuff that I'm used to, but it has different stuff. So one example is the really cool thing called operators. And so this is the kind of thing that I would often do with the scissor tool. So say, for example, we've got a chunk of audio here, and we want to repeat it, but change the spread of time of repeats. we've got this thing over here in the bottom left called operators. So you choose the number of repeats here, and look how it's automatically scissor tooling the audio file for us, right? To the number of chops that we want. So let's say, for example, 16 chops, and then we can actually change the balance like this. So do we want it to go like or the other way around? And furthermore, we can actually dive in here, hold Alt, and Shift to find like a transient of the sound. So like here, for example, let's find something that's going to be a bit more transient-y. Okay, let's listen to this. And there's also further capabilities. So here, for example, we can just bounce this to a single part so that we capture this movement, right? Bounce in place. And now we can actually go in and edit it further. Like say, for example, we want to have like a pitch down or pitch up, or we want to have the volume ramp in like this. We can do this on individual pieces of audio, all sorts of things. So these kinds of like chops and more IDM-y type things that, you know, I actually end up doing more often than the offline processing is actually a little bit easier here. And we can also take sounds like this, for example, where we have these multi-chops, like these different timed chops, and we can automatically convert these into something like a multi-sample, which is really, really nice workflow. So let's say, for example, slice to multi-sample. Now we can either choose the size of notes, which is 1/8, we already know that, or you can get it to auto-detect and all sorts of things. So I'm just going to say size of notes slice at 1/8, because that's the size of these notes already. And now it should create us a new sampler here with each of these notes. So now we can actually play the samples, like the kind of chops. And then, I mean, there's a whole other myriad of things we could do in the sampler. I mean, I've done a video on why I think the sampler is so freaking awesome. So you can just imagine the kind of audio mangling capabilities that you can do here. And I find it's a lot more fluid and a lot more conducive to creativity because it's a little bit more open-ended. You can kind of put effects anywhere you want. You can route things however you want them. You can have these audio and devices share a single hybrid track. So in the previous video, I also spoke a little bit about the analysis tools, specifically supervision, which is built into Cubase. Now, yes, you're not able to create, you know, as advanced and easy to use system, but using the tools within Bitwig, we can create very similar things. So I want to focus in a little bit on the grid, which is Bitwig's modular system. So this might be a little bit confusing or advanced for most people, but just know you can build a lot of similar tools that we often use for analysis. So here, for example, we have the ability to add spectrum analyzers. We have the ability to add oscilloscopes and various other tools. We can also change the interface of the grid over here, so we can kind of see things a little bit easier. And on top of this, we actually have the ability to bring audio from other channels, essentially a sidechain source. So what we can do is we can add a audio sidechain over here. And here we can actually choose audio from any of the channels. So let's say, for example, bring in the audio from just the kick and bass, and we can send this to the spectrum analyzer. And what we can do is we can duplicate this, and we can bring in the audio from just the percussions. Okay, Are you following? So you can kind of see already how this can be a super powerful system to create your own analysis tools to kind of see a little bit better what's going on, and the ability to just send audio so fluidly within all of the elements in the DAW is just amazing. So I'm just going to carry on doing this over here. We've got kick, bass, percussions, synths. I think we have another one here for theme stuff, and then another one for all the sound effects. So here we can actually set a different color for each of these. So we can say red, orange, yellow, and green, etc. And then when we punch these into the spectrum analyzer, you'll see that the different colors will correspond to different stuff in the spectrum, in the frequency spectrum. So here we actually we only have 4 channels. So what I want to do is I want to perhaps put my themes into my sound effects group. And then we can actually go over here back to the effects grid, and we can just go, yeah, so we've got 4 channels which we can analyze simultaneously, which is enough. Okay, so we've set up an oscilloscope for just the kick and bass channel. Now we can set up an oscilloscope which we were going to set into stereo mode, and we can send the input from the mix in there. So we've got a readout of the stereo and the kick and bass, but what we can do is we can link them to the same clock. We can also use this value readout over here. And what we can do with this is we can set it to dB. And then it's going to give us the exact dB readout of each of these, like the peaks of each of these channels, right? And we can send one in from the mix as well. Anyways, you get the idea. You can build like your own tools that, you know, if you just know the systems and how they work, you can kind of build your own tools. It's such an open-ended, modular sort of DAW that, you know, you could either build the tools, or the chances are somebody has already done it, and you can find that kind of preset either in the library or somewhere online. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the control room, which kind of goes hand in hand with the analysis stuff, because the control room channel in Cubase was a nice way of adding any kind of acoustic correction software or analysis software that's going to be completely outside of the project. So if you render something, it doesn't actually affect your renders. So I've done a video on how to actually set this up in Bitwig. In Bitwig, there's the ability to basically send audio from your master channel back into the project and then to your outputs, which gives you the ability to just create something like a control room within your project, which is a super handy way of being able to do this. And then when you render stuff, it doesn't actually, you know, nothing that's on the master gets rendered because there isn't actually anything on the master. But here in my control room, I've got various analysis tools. I've actually got a limiter, which brings up the level for when I'm streaming. I've got a thing called Sound ID Reference, which basically is acoustic correction software, which changes the frequencies, but it only works for me in my room. And I don't want to obviously put that on the renders. So I've done a video on that. I'm going to post a link to that in the description as well, where you can check out how to actually create this within Bitwig. But like I said, you know, the more I'm using the software, the more I'm figuring out how to create all the things that I was missing or do it better than I was doing previously. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is updates and, you know, where I think the programs are going, you know, the future of each of the DAWs. So in the year that I've been using Bitwig, there have been several pretty massive updates. One was the addition of MSEGs, which is, you know, something like serum LFOs and serum envelopes or vital LFOs directly within the DAW, which you can then modulate anything. So you could essentially add something like a drawable LFO to a plugin that doesn't actually have it, which I don't see in any other DAW, which is an absolutely massive new feature. We've got a brand new browser that they've brought in Bitwig 5, We've got a bunch of new oscillator modes that kind of draw from the idea of being able to draw your own shapes. We've got a new kind of clipper/wave shaper, again, being able to draw your own shapes. We've also seen several new devices, not just in the Bitwig 5 update, but before that. I don't know if you folks remember the whole spectral device controversy, but that was a pretty massive update too. And, you know, to see all of these massive jumps and advances in things that aren't really specifically standard in other DAWs has been pretty huge for Bitwig in the past year. And I don't see any other DAWs taking such big leaps and bounds into territory that's kind of considered more maybe niche, but it's definitely the future of where music production is going. A lot of the more modern music takes advantage of these tools, and that's why plugins like Serum, Vital, and Phaseplant have become so popular, is because they offer these more advanced tools. And going back and looking at the change logs of updates that Cubase has had over the past year, it looks like there has only been bug fixes and maintenance updates in the last year. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but you know, I actually rarely open Cubase anymore, so I don't even bother updating it, and I'm actually consider uninstalling it because there's a lot of bloatware and that kind of stuff like I brought up in the original video. And yeah, thinking about how long it's been since I've actually opened the program and how much space it actually uses on my computer is starting to become a factor. Okay, so now I want to talk about a couple of really special things that Bitwig has built in that you don't see native in pretty much any other DAW. The first is a pretty simple one, but it's, for me, and just the way that I work in terms of getting the very clean mix and stuff. The first one is pretty simple, but it's actually such a cool feature when you do a lot of kind of grouping and bus processing in your mix. That's the ability to put send channels inside your group channels. So here, for example, let's say we have a send here with a reverb, and we want to use this send channel specifically on our lead sound. So let's call this lead reverb, right? And now we have another one, which is maybe like a different reverb. Let's say, for example, I want to pull up like a plate reverb or something. And now this is going to be like our percussion reverb, right? Now, when we're mixing the track and we put, say, for example, like processing on the group of our percussion channel, we're probably going to want to put either the same processing or, you know, we want to mix that percussion reverb to be part of that group somehow. And in Bitwig, we can actually just drag it inside the group. And now this send effect is now nested inside the group. So any processing that happens on this percussion channel is applied to that group as well, which I think is not only super cool for processing capabilities and just, you know, making things a little bit easier for routing, but now when we stem the track out, we can render the stem of the percussions and all the effects that are within that and that are relevant to just that percussion channel will now be stemmed accordingly. You don't have to have a separate stem with just your send channels, which was a thing in Cubase. So we can put this lead reverbs into the leads channel, and it just makes the project a lot kind of cleaner. It makes mixing a lot easier because everything that's applied to the group is now applied to any effects that are relevant to that group. You know what I mean? So, I mean, this might be a thing in other DAWs, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see it, you know? Maybe it's just that people aren't using this very often. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about that's truly special to Bitwig is the thing called voice stacking. What it is it's basically a modulator that allows you to change any parameter across a series of voices. So essentially, imagine a unison synth, but being able to change any parameter in that synth across the voices. And then you can bend what values those are. So let me show you a quick example. I'm going to add the voice stack modulator over here. So currently this only works for Bitwig native devices, but if you create something in the grid, it'll work with that as well. And that's also for the note grid. So you can do weird multi-channel MIDI stuff using the voice stack, which I'm going to do in a future video, of course. But for now, just know that you have to actually open the device panel. You have to actually open the device inspector on the left and enable the voice stacking over here. So let's go with 5 voices for now. And notice here, if we have like randoms or LFOs in the patch, you'll see that now there's 5 voices and they'll start jumping up and down. So these are now different randoms for each voice in the patch. But here, what we can do is we could, say for example, if we want a different filter parameter for each of the voices, we could just assign this voice stack to that filter. And then what it's going to do is it's going to divide that first value and that last value. It's going to divide it by 5 and split those values across the range. So voice 1 is going to be about here, voice 2 is going to be about here, voice 3 about here, etc., etc. This is by default. We can actually go in and change the voice values manually to get some weird things, but generally speaking, I just leave it at either 0 to 1 or -1 to 1. To quickly create something like unison, what we would do is we would slightly detune those voice stacks. But remember, this works across any parameter within the synth and the effects in that synth. So we could say, a different pan value across the range. We could also say have different effects across the range, which is truly interesting, especially when we're looking at like resonators and all those kinds of interesting things. So let's just start voice stacking some of these effects over here. Get some all sorts of different sounds. I also like voice stacking the octaves because you can get some really wide sounds that way. And this also works for any parameters in the randoms, modulators, or LFOs and stuff on the patch. So we could say, for example, have different modulator LFO per voice stack. We could have different random speeds per voice stack. Now you see here, these are starting to like jump irregularly. And then when you combine this with like traditional voicing, oh, you get some crazy pads. The other truly special thing is the native modular system. So I showed you guys the system a little bit with the effects grid and that analysis thing. And I've got plenty of videos on my channel with, synthesizing and generating MIDI stuff within the grid. So I'm going to post a couple of my favorites in the description as well. So definitely go ahead and check those out. Okay, folks, so I do have some cons. I do have some things that have been kind of irritating me a little bit since I've brought them up in the original video. One of which is that there haven't really been too many developments in terms of the UI. Yes, we had a new browser, but there still isn't the ability to change the color schemes, to edit the kind of workings of things, and that kind of stuff. We haven't seen too much of that kind of stuff, UX and UI, which I think could be improved upon, at least the customization of it. I think they should give us more options to do that. And the other thing is the way that it handles MIDI and audio comping. I wish there was another way to be able to set it up because it really confuses me. I'm not going to get into it in this video, but for those who don't know what it is, essentially Bitwig automatically loops audio and records it into like a new take, but being able to then take the one take and drag it out into the project is just a little bit of a kind of workflow nightmare. So unless people have kind of suggestions as to maybe some tutorials I can check out to make my life a little bit easier with that, I do think they should give us some customization options to be able to choose how it works though. Or at the very least, just like turn it off, Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the future of DAWs and where I think a lot of traditional DAWs are going and where I think stuff like Bitwig is truly special. So I feel like Bitwig is focusing in on a lot of more modern techniques that a lot of the other DAWs aren't really too interested in. Stuff like MSEGs, really complex modulation systems, native modular stuff. It's the kind of stuff that more modern sound designers and musicians are using, and we do have them in other tools and other plugins, but when we think about having to buy a DAW and a bunch of other plugins, things can tend to get quite expensive. So just having a DAW with all of these modern tools kind of built in, I think is really cool. But anyway, I think Bitwig is focusing in on a lot of the more niche things that other DAWs will never bother doing. Stuff like MECGs, drawable, oscillators, and modular stuff. I think a lot of the other DAWs aren't even bothered with that stuff. So they're truly setting themselves apart with the more modern music production, I would say. Whereas a lot of the other DAWs are focusing in on fixing up their more traditional tools, like, making their mixer look more like an actual mixing console and making the plugins look like actual hardware units and those types of things where, yeah, I think Bitwig is definitely looking more into the future. So anyway, that about sums it up. Let me know if you think I'm biased or not, but just remember that, these are obviously just my opinions. I did use Cubase for like well over a decade before switching, so it was a bit of a painful choice, but on the other side of it, I'm actually really happy that I made that decision, and I feel like I've been so much more productive since I've made the switch. Anyway, yeah, like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If there's anything that's been on your mind, have you switched from Cubase to Bitwig or any other DAW to Bitwig, or from, maybe not even Bitwig? Just have you done the DAW switch? What were your thoughts? What were your hurdles? Let me know in the comments. Awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think. See you guys next time. One last thing. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.